World News 156, this is your Fukushima radiation report for November the 12th of 2014. I noticed in the last couple days that a whole bunch of articles have come out basically reiterating the same thing, that off the coast of California they've finally detected 100 miles out Fukushima's radiation. I just want to say real quick before I get started on my news articles, which this is a mimicking article of one of those saying the same thing. And also it claims that there's absolutely no harm to humans and all of this other stuff. It's been 3 years since Fukushima, and only a completely brain-dead idiot would actually believe that Fukushima leaking radioactive material into the ocean for 3 years, which actually has killed off most of the ocean, is causing cancer to rise on the west coast, and indeed Japan and everywhere in between. But it's not only confined to the Pacific Ocean, and I'll tell you why. It's because of something called the water cycle and the jet stream. With precipitation, these contaminants are spread everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. And that's why it's not just the Pacific Ocean that's dying. So, onward and forward to my articles. You can see that this is that basically same article saying that, it's really off the coast of California now, 3 years later. Well, I would actually like to read to you something from dw.de, which is Dutch news. And one of the things that I pride myself on is getting news from all over the world. So I'd like to report to you from somewhere other than Western crap news that is absolutely published everywhere. Fukushima disaster site like a science fiction film. Science journalist Ranga Yogeshwar has gained extensive access to Japan's battered Fukushima power plant. He speaks to DW about exploring radiation, contaminated zones, and how the cleanup has progressed so far. The crippled Fukushima Daiichi power plant is still recovering from an undersea quake and tsunami in March 2011, triggered the worst nuclear crisis in a generation. The plant suffered a meltdown at 3 of its 6 reactors, and the site operator Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, is still working to remove spent uranium fuel rods from the damaged structures. Concerns about radiation contamination mean access to the site has been tightly controlled, but recently a team, including science journalist Ranga Yogeshwar, was given extensive access. DW. Mr. Yogeshwar, can you describe what you saw when you arrived at the nuclear plant? Ranga. We all remember these dramatic pictures from the catastrophe back in 2011, and you can see the scars of this catastrophe. You can see buildings which are partially torn down. You can see how the tsunami devastated the area, the cooling systems, and so on. So it's a mixture of things which are old and on the other side, new constructions. Normally if you construct something new, you first take away its debris. In Fukushima, the debris is still there. Given the high radiation levels, what precautions did you have to take? Once you get there, you enter a main building and you have to undress totally. You have to put on your protection suit, which is a whole body suit. You have a mask, you have a cooling packs because it's dreadfully warm. You have 3 pairs of gloves. You have to make sure that everything is really nice and tight. The most important aspect within this site is that naturally you have to minimize your radioactive dose, which means we have a couple of measuring instruments showing us the actual level of activity at the spot we are standing. You can't hear a lot, so you have engineers from TEPCO who are with you, and they speak through a megaphone. In our case, we went to Block 1 and Block 4 in a small van. And again, getting in and out is a whole set of procedures so as to not contaminate your area. Getting into the van means stripping on plastic coverages on your shoes so that you do not import radioactive dust into the bus. How is the cleanup coming along? Outside of Block 4, there are areas where the radioactive activity is so high that the electronics of robots failed. There is no plan. People don't even know where these melted fuel rods are. You can see that 3 of the blocks are being permanently cooled. You have per day a production of about 700,000 liters of contaminated water, and they are setting up a couple big complexes, nuclear washing facilities where they try to clean the water. 2 of them are going into operation within the next 2 to 3 weeks. This whole Fukushima Daiichi site is full of people. There's a lot of technology, and you can see that in some areas, something can be done, and in others, there are still a lot of questions. This is not a problem that is going to be solved in the next months. It's going to take years, if not decades. Until now, media access to Fukushima plant has been limited. How extensive was your access to the site? We were quite free to run around in a certain way, but as I say, this is not a normal site. You always have to keep in mind that you have areas which are definitely no-go because of radiation. Was there a limit on how long you could stay there for? We had to plan a workout time schedule, and once you're on site, you have to make sure the radiation levels are as you predicted. So there's a lot of very fine-tuned work, as you have to be very disciplined and be really fast, depending on where you are. The psychological stress is immense, and the physical stress is immense. You have to imagine that filming there means you have to have a mask due to the high heat, and you can't see clearly. Our cameraman couldn't see into his viewfinder, so you measure the distance with a laser instrument, and then you shout out into the ear of the cameraman 3 to 5 meters. He sets the camera, so it's really hard work. TEPCO, which operates this Fukushima plant, has been criticized for withholding information during and after the disaster. How forthcoming did you find the company? I think TEPCO is a company which changed entirely. Shortly after the disaster, there were a lot of questions of liability and so on. I think the disaster with all consequences is not a situation where you can go on cheating. Things are open, things are clear, and I met with people within TEPCO who were very open and who spoke with me about the sins in the past, of data which had been falsified, of things which hadn't been done. My feeling is that the company has changed. You also visited some of the surrounding villages. Why have these been described as ghost towns? Because if you go inland and see villages, you see them literally deserted. People have left. You see empty supermarkets, beer machines with beer inside still. You see a fuel station, and you see grass coming up next to the pumps. So this is something really spooky. You realize that time has frozen in these villages. You have closed areas called red zones, where presumably, the next decades, nobody will be able to live. You also have orange zones where people are allowed in, but they're not allowed to live there. And you have lots of decontamination troops going in and ripping off the upper 5 centimeters of soil and putting it in black plastic bags. This is like a science fiction film. You drive through valleys that are filled with these black plastic bags. Around 130,000 people in the Fukushima prefecture are still displaced. How do they feel? They have lost everything. They have lost their communities, their jobs, their houses, their own personal biography. I entered houses where you can see the clothes or the piano where the children used to play. Everything has to stay there due to contamination. So this is really a tragedy for the people here. They see their houses and they are not allowed to enter. It's like a wound which is not healing. How much of the land is unlivable as a result of the disaster? It's a vast area called northwest of Fukushima Daiichi, going up about roughly 45 kilometers. You have so-called hotspot areas with very high contamination, and you have areas which are acceptable, so there are leopard spots where people might live there, and other areas where remain no-go zones. And that basically concludes the article. It says, Ranga Yogeshwar is a Luxembourgian science journalist, author, and physicist. He has worked at the Swiss Institute for Nuclear Research, at CERN in Geneva, and at someplace I definitely can't pronounce. He has worked as an independent author and journalist since 2008, and the documentary Ranga Yogeshwar in Fukushima was produced for German public television broadcaster ARD. So that is the real story about what is going on at Fukushima and how it is still a problem, and how it's a joke of them saying that it's 100 miles off the coast of California. They're really just trying to keep people from panicking, in my opinion. So share far and wide, and love and light, guys.